Okay, I'm going to talk about labor exploitation, ownership, and capitalism a little bit. So the thing about a lot of people they point at capitalism and they like to blame capitalism for the inequality in the world, right? And it's that inequality that ultimately leads to social strife. Social strife, poverty, violence. All of the things that scarcity brings, right? War, perhaps. So we gotta really think about this though, because when you point the finger at capitalism, what you're really doing is you're blaming a word. You're blaming an economic structure. But what you're not realizing is that under that economic structure is a social structure. Okay, under that economic structure is sociology that ultimately guides the economic structure. So the labor exploitation and the ownership that people like to, they like to blame capitalism for, you're not actually blaming capitalism. Capitalism is just the name that we've given to the labor exploitation. It's not the thing driving the labor exploitation. It's not the thing driving the wealth inequality. It's just the name that you give to that inequality. So what do I mean by that? Well, it's the disparity of organization between the owner class and the working class. Okay, that is what causes the wealth inequality. We've just given a name to that disparity, and that name is capitalism. But you can't blame a word for a problem. It's like blaming a racial slur for racism. It's not a valid argument. So what I mean to say is that if you want to fix the economic system, you have to fix the underlying social structure that guides it. You can't blame capitalism and simultaneously point the finger at a word. Okay, what you're really doing is you're pointing the finger at yourself. You're pointing the finger at your own inability to organize with your fellow working class citizens. And why are you failing to organize? Well, ultimately it's because there's a ruling class who's dividing you, right? And we can talk about whether that division is purposeful or whether it is perhaps just ingrained. Perhaps the ruling class it truly believes that the division they're creating is perhaps the ruling class believes that the actions they're taking are justified. They probably believe they're right, most of them anyway. There's definitely some sinister people who know what they're doing, but by and large, everyone who invests in the S&P 500, all of your 401ks, all of your IRAs, what those retirement accounts are doing, and those investments, they're siphoning profits away from the working class. Okay, they're siphoning profits away from the people who are producing that value. Okay, that's the nature of a stock market. That's the nature of capitalism, right? But why does that happen? Here's the thing about capitalism. Capitalism doesn't dictate how profits are distributed. All it does is create competition within markets to create profits. The magnitude of class organization is what determines the distribution of those profits. So that's why McDonald's employees, who are rather unorganized, right? They're not unionized. That's why those McDonald's employees they got bad wages, right? And that's why the UAW, the United Auto Workers, that's why they're winning with these union contracts, right? The only thing that drives that determines the distribution of profits in a capitalistic economy is the magnitude of class consciousness. It's the magnitude to which the working class works with each other. Okay, so what happens if you threaten a national strike? Do the day traders who have been siphoning the profits off while not actually contributing to the value production, do those day traders, do they continue to siphon the profits through the dividends, or do those dividends get dissolved into working class wages while the investors' return on investments become return of investments? That's the point I want to make here, is that if the working class is organized and they're unionizing, they're organizing labor unions, labor strikes, labor movements, worker co-ops, things like that, what happens is those dividends that are getting paid out to people investing in the stock market, who traditionally are kind of exploiting that labor, right? They're siphoning that value production away from the workers. What happens is all of those capital investments, they change from return on investments to return of investments. So those investments will get returned to them, just not a whole lot more than return, right? It'll just be return plus inflation, perhaps, but they're not going to be siphoning dividends. They're not going to be siphoning profits from it so much if the working class is organized. And that's the point I'm trying to make here. And I've touched on this illusion of what capitalism is a lot. And the truth is that as that working class becomes more organized, we could argue that behavior is socialism. So as the magnitude of socialism, the magnitude of class consciousness increases, well, maybe perhaps the magnitude of capitalism decreases. But I don't really think that's what it is, because capitalism, again, it doesn't determine the distribution of profits. All it does is organize competition within markets. You can still have that competition while also having high working class wages. There's nothing keeping those two things from happening at the same time. All capitalism is privatized profits, okay? And ultimately, if the working class is organized, they claim those private profits. The working class, the workers, claim them. The difference between capitalism and communism is that the profits are kind of given to the government, right? And they're distributed by the government. That's the only difference. It's the truth is there's not really a difference between capitalism and communism. The difference is the only thing that determines how those economies function is the magnitude of class consciousness. So when people tell you that public profits, that public ownership is better than private ownership, or vice versa, it's kind of an illusion. Public and private ownership are just two different ways to look at the value creation that the population is creating. If you want to define it as public ownership, then you're kind of looking at a communistic type of economy. But if that communistic economy remains democratic and the people are, organized, then they're going to elect politicians and officials who support the proper allocation of the value production, the proper allocation of the money, right? And so in that sense, that public ownership is evenly distributed. And the same is with capitalism. If the value production is owned by private owners, but the working class is organized, again, if class consciousness remains high, then they claim the value to their labor. The public-private ownership dichotomy is an illusion. It all that matters is the underlying sociology. All that matters is how organized the working class is. So when you go and you want to blame capitalism, you're really, again, you're just pointing the finger at yourself. You're pointing at your own failures to organize with your working class citizens. And again, to touch on why that organization is right now very, very low, why there's such poor organization among the working class, it's because of that division, right? It's because of the division that the media propagates. They propagate fear, and then they try to convince the working class that they are their own, that the opposite side of the political spectrum, the opposite side of the culture war, are the reasons for their problems. So they'll tell you that black people are the problem. They'll tell you that cops are the problem, right? Blue versus Black Lives Matter, right? They'll tell you that transgender people are the problem. They'll tell you that Christians are the problem. They'll tell you that whatever it may be, there's all kinds of culture wars. They'll tell you that the people getting abortions are the problem. They'll tell you that the people restricting abortions are the problem. When in reality, all of those culture wars are driven and made worse by the wealth inequality itself. They are driven by they are made worse by a lack of class organization. All you have to do is forget the differences with your fellow working class citizens and organize. You have to be as organized as the day traders are, okay? The day traders have a bunch of machine learning algorithms, AI controlling all of their investments, right? They have these giant investment banks who are, they're basically They have this high frequency trading that's all designed to siphon profits away from the working class. You have to be equally as organized as them. And by you, I mean we, us, together. If we're not, then the wealth inequality is going to keep rising. Now, that's not to say that if somebody goes and works 80 hours a week, they don't deserve more money than somebody working 40, right? There's some room for the meritocracy argument, right? But at the same time, you gotta make sure people's necessities are met. If we push the wealth inequality so high to where people are living on the street, people aren't eating, people can't afford health care, then what's going to happen? Well, obviously, those people are going to get fed up, and they're going to effectively revolt against the rest of the population, and that's not good for anybody. And if you are someone who, if you are in the 1%, you got to think about that. You have to understand that it's not good for anybody. It's not good for you when the working class, when the lower class in particular, gets fed up and they start getting violent, because violence is indiscriminate. It's not going to necessarily be targeted at anyone in particular. It's just kind of be directed at whoever is in the vicinity at the time, and we don't want that. We can think our way through these problems so that we don't have to fight our way through them. That's what your consciousness has evolved to do. And if we're not conscious of it, if we're just running through the motions, not thinking about how we are running our economy, we're not thinking about the sociology that underlies that economy, then we're going to continue down the same path. We're going to continue through the same patterns that we're seeing now, the same vicious cycles. We have to actually become conscious of what's happening. We have to think. Again, we think so that we don't have to fight. And I don't know how else to say it. Like, if you're somebody that blames capitalism, again, you have to understand that capitalism is just the word that we have assigned to a lack of class organization. And you're basically pointing your finger at yourself. So give that a little thought. Thanks for watching.